Sure you do. And I'm going apple picking with Scooby-Doo. Toy, 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 toy.
Scooby-Doo has existed for a long time, being one of the most iconic characters in the history of animation and a mascot representing Hanna-Barbera for many years since 1969, going through multiple upon multiple of incarnations. But with all the Scooby-Doo animated media that has spawned over the years, there has been surprisingly a shockingly low number of this franchise's movies that have actually gone to theaters, which is truly a darn shame, since some of these films are filled to the brim with artistic merit, gripping as hell stories, and even pushing the charm of these characters to the nth degree in order to convey a ton of emotion and suspense. I mean, a lot of these movies, despite being slapped with the label of straight to video, have some real effort put into them. Some key examples of this include Zombie Island, Alien Invaders, and Witch's Ghost. And with the release of the most recent movie in the franchise, I thought I would look back on every single theatrically released Scooby film up until this point, from the live action Scooby-Doo movies to the newly released Scoob. With all that said, let's cut the doobie and get to the Scooby. Start off with the first ever cinematically released Scooby-Doo film released in 2002, Inglorious live action. Okay, look. Now I know that Scooby-Doo should have been an animation like its origin, but keep in mind that this movie came out at a time where the craze of old animated IPs getting the live action treatment was the standard in filmmaking, the majority of which would be bombarded with painful jokes and copious amounts of product placement. But with that said, does this movie hit the same predictable beats as those other abominations? Surprisingly no. Despite being a film associated with the craze, it wasn't meant to be pandering. The plot of the movie focuses on the Mystery Inc. gang splitting up after a mishap involving the Luna Ghost. The movie then cuts 2 years later with the owner of a theme park called Spooky Island, Dr. Mondevarius, sends letters to each member of the gang, enticing them to solve the mystery of what's happening to the teenagers leaving the island.
They look like sober, well-behaved college kids.
Precisely. And they didn't before they came.
The gang then figures out that these disturbingly rendered monsters steal the souls of the teenagers and use their bodies as human puppets to survive sunlight. So the gang set up a plan to get all of the teens' souls back to their bodies, while Scooby-Doo almost gets sacrificed to an ancient altar. In the end, Dr. Mondevarius is revealed to be none other than Scrappy-Doo, who intended to absorb the spirits and become all-powerful. Fortunately, the gang manages to defeat Scrappy, return the souls, and free Mondevarius. Now after that plot summary, you'd probably be thinking that this movie doesn't sound anything like a Scooby-Doo movie. And yeah, it isn't. From me, it's as far from a Scooby-Doo plot as you can get. For one, the actors for the main cast seem a bit unrefined from my point of view. Not bad by any means, it just seems like they're not embracing the role. Freddie Prinze Jr. and Linda Cardellini especially seem like they're just playing different people. But on the plus side, Matthew Lillard is actually great in this movie. You could tell he tries his damnness to convince the audience that he is Shaggy, even going the extra mile to talk like the Casey Kasem incarnation of the character. I can definitely see why he would become the replacement voice for Shaggy for every single iteration of the "Oh." Well, we'll get to that when we get to that. I've also noticed that there were a lot of Hanna-Barbera references added throughout the film.
Hong Kong Phooey, watch the Fist of Fury, would you, buddy?
I'm as cute as a Powerpuff Girl!
This is the most embarrassing thing you've done since you decided to clean your beans at Don Knotch's Christmas party.
The Papa Smurf figure.
Which from my point of view, kinda showed that the writers did care for the kind of product they made. Anyway, back to the movie itself. While it does try its hardest to give a good movie experience for the viewer, it gives less of a compelling Scooby-Doo style mystery, which is a bit of a turnoff for most hardcore fans of the franchise. The scripting is kind of muddled. It's kind of obvious that there was some attempt to draw a fine line between adult and kids jokes, which is obvious rewatching this movie after all this time. It kinda seems like there was a sort of previous script that was a lot more focused towards adults, hence the subtle drug references here and there. In fact, originally it was meant to be a PG-13 live-action animation hybrid film full of adult-centric humor and a lot more marijuana references. This happened during the Hanna-Barbera phase when they were trying to repurpose their old IPs for an adult crowd. Some examples of this included Space Ghost Coast to Coast, Sealab 2021, Harvey Birdman, and Flintstones on the Rocks. There were even some major changes done to the first draft of this movie. Apparently, in this older version of the movie, Daphne and Velma had a secret lesbian relationship, Shaggy was a full-blown stoner, and there were a lot more marijuana references in the film. But due to the failure of the Josie and the Pussycats movie, the studio changed the script last minute and we got the version we have now. But despite its flaws and what it could have been, we're left with a pretty serviceable movie at the most. Released 2 2 years later was a sequel aptly named Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed, the much sterile film of the two in my opinion. In this film, gone are the subtle drug references and adult humor that dominated the first, but on the plus side, we do get some homages to old Hanna-Barbera stuff. Instead, we have an actual Scooby-Doo mystery. The film focuses on the Mystery Inc. gang on the grand opening of the Coulsonian Criminology Museum, where a masked figure called Evil Masked Figure busts in and manages to steal the costumes of villains from the gang's past. Meanwhile, Shaggy and Scooby try to prove themselves as competent members to the rest of the gang by attempting to solve the mystery without help. As the film goes on, the gang manages to trace the mystery back to three subjects: Alicia Silverstone, Mr. Wickles, and the museum curator Patrick, who sort of acts as Velma's love interest for the film. Anyway, Shaggy and Scooby-Doo figure out that the evil masked figure was stealing the costumes to bring them to life and wreak havoc against Coolsville. But after the duo manage to remove the control panel, the monsters go after them for it. After reverting it to change the monsters back into costumes, the gang manage to break into the lab and take down the evil masked figure. The culprit is then revealed to be Jonathan Jacobo, the original pterodactyl ghost. The film ends with the gang celebrating and Scooby-Doo showing off the Game Boy Advance secret code. Overall, this movie is really enjoyable, definitely better than the first in my humble opinion. The movie throws out the idea for a general immersing movie experience and switches it out for an although predictable, fun, joke-filled piece of entertainment. It manages to provide a solid mystery with even some sense of expectation subversion. At the end of the day, it's a movie that gives the audience exactly what it says on the tin, and I couldn't have it any other way. And thus, we reach the final part of this trilogy of sorts with the recent and most controversial out of the three, titled Scoob. This has been the film that most movie fans have been split on, with one half saying that it's a perfectly good animated film, while the other half are calling it a disgrace to the franchise and nothing like a real Scooby movie. In my opinion, I'm kind of in the middle of the road after rewatching it recently. After the first 15 minutes telling the origin story of how the gang met, the film shifts its gaze to Mystery Inc. attempting to convince Simon Cowell to invest in turning Mystery Inc. into a business. But the cynical Simon Cowell can't invest because he sees Scoob and Shag as the weak links of the group. In an attempt to blow off some steam, the duo go off to the bowling alley where they become ambushed by a horde of these seemingly random bowling pin robots. Thankfully, they get rescued by Blue Falcon and Dynamite, where they explain that the fiend that sent those robots after them was none other than Dick Dastardly. The Blue Falcon team must travel around the world in order to find the three Cerberus skulls before Dastardly collects them all and opens up the gates to the underworld. With a plot synopsis like that, it's not that hard to see where the vast majority of complaints came from. So let's go through this movie with some pros and cons. Pros: the animation is nice and clean with a very appealing color palette that complements the film quite well. Also, the character designs are actually pretty good in the universe of the film. They do seem like a hybrid between the Where Are You and What's New Scooby-Doo incarnations of the franchise. I also did appreciate the plethora of Hanna-Barbera references that can be found throughout the film. But anyway, let's get into the cons, and let's point out the pretty obvious elephant in the room: the voice actors. Will Forte and Frank Welker are fine, but a lot like the first live-action movie, the actors playing the rest of the gang are once again really out of place. Zac Efron sounds like the same guy he's played in The Lorax back in 2012, and Gina Rodriguez sounds just like, well, Gina Rodriguez. Also, the villain kinda seems like your typical throwaway evil genius, and for me, it does lose a bit of its charm when some of its jokes are like this.
And apparently he's been stealing Netflix by using his mother's account.
That is not fair for the rest of us who have to pay for Netflix.
You have to pay for Netflix? We're in
IKEA.
the Falcon Fury! Did you say IKEA?
Nope, I said Falcon Fury, just like you.
Overall, Scoob isn't particularly a great film or an abysmal film. It just rides the line of being average. It's good for a chuckle every now and again, but nothing more. Even though I've acted pretty neutral towards all of these films, I just wanted to say that I really do love these films, some more than others. And if you do like or dislike any of these films I've talked about today, then let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear other fans' opinions on this type of stuff. As always, don't forget to follow me on Twitter @GeekToons and join my Discord server to hang out with me and other cartoon fans. And I'll see you all in the next one.